Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome today to our panel on the report or presenting the report release of our upcoming report entitled The French Factor, How French Proficiency Shapes Employment Outcomes in Quebec. Oh, I'm getting a notification that I'm requesting to record on my computer. I am indeed. Wonderful. So today I should start with my name. My name is Morgan Kenya. I am our Interim Director of Policy and Research here at PERT. Today I will be presenting some of the key findings of an upcoming report that we've been working on over the last year or so, highlighting some of the key, particularly statistics, our bread and butter here at PERT, looking at how language impacts employment outcomes in Quebec, and I'll get a little deeper into what I mean by that in a moment. So this particular report, in combination with a previous report that our policy researcher Marlena did a webinar on for last week entitled Need to Know, Want to Know, contributes to the ever-expanding portfolio of research we have on language learning and employment outcomes according to language here in Quebec. And will be available in the coming weeks. We're really excited about these two reports. So in terms of our flow for the day, why don't I actually go ahead and share my screen with you all. Perfect. Now I just need to make sure so that you can see it. There we go. Perfect. There we go. What we'll be doing today is diving into some of the key facts from our report and some of the context that goes into it, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Because we're a small group, I'll invite you if you have any questions or comments throughout of maybe a more technical or just comprehension perspective, feel free to just jump in and ask. And then if there are any broader questions, we can perhaps save those until the end. Our webinar will be conducted in English, and you are welcome to communicate, participate in either language if you have any questions. And as you can see, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And one more matter of housekeeping, for any questions that you would not like to verbalize, you're welcome to just go ahead and add those to the chat below. Now, before I move any further, I'd like to acknowledge that the Provincial Employment Roundtable is currently situated on unceded Indigenous land. The Kainai Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward with our presentation. Now, some of you might be familiar with PERT, so I'll perhaps keep this light, but PERT is a nonprofit organization standing for the Provincial Employment Roundtable, or la Table Ronde Provinciale de l'Emploi en français, and we bring together a diverse network of stakeholders to address the employment challenges and also opportunities facing English-speaking Quebecers. We have three main pillars: policy and research, development and engagement and communications, and we use these three pillars to collaborate with diverse partners from the regions of Quebec, from community organizations, educational institutions, employment service providers, employers, and government to identify issues and forge solutions. And in this way, we are dedicated to building and strengthening employment support networks and ensuring inclusion in Quebec's labor market for generations to come. So, as a part of what we do, our research department in particular is dedicated to creating and advancing a robust evidence base of statistics as well as more qualitative data that establishes factually what the situation of our community is, as well as the needs, some of the gaps they might be experiencing, and ways that we can better support them. And that enables us to ensure that our policy recommendations, our advocacy are all grounded in a grassroots perspective of our community members and subject matter experts. So the primary thing that we must establish is how we define our community. There are a lot of different ways that you can measure or define linguistic identity. For our work and for this presentation in particular, because we're going to be relying on statistical data, I'm going to rely on Statistics Canada's definition of first official language spoken, which takes into account a couple different variables for how we measure language, including mother tongue, language people use most often at home, and their knowledge of official languages. And these come together to define their first official language spoken between French or English. And we also, I will note, divide individuals who speak English and French equally between the definition of English and French speakers. And this gives us a more robust understanding of how many people likely seek out English language services or might require French language learning support services. So that's our definition of kind of linguistic community and therefore English and French speakers. But I'll also flag that this report will use another definition or another way of counting languages known as knowledge of official languages. And this asks individuals about their ability to conduct a conversation of official languages. And concretely what that means is, or it gives us a picture of bilingualism within the official languages for English and French speakers. So an individual might be classed as an English speaker according to this first official languages spoken definition, but they might be considered to have a knowledge of French because they've answered yes that they can conduct a conversation in French within the knowledge of official languages question. And vice versa, under this definition, a French speaker might be categorized as having proficiency in English. And of course, people might have knowledges of many other languages, but this measures particularly the two official languages within Canada. So using these definitions, hello and welcome to everybody who's entering. You're just at the beginning of the presentation. I'm doing a little table setting and then I'll get into the bread and butter of our statistics. So PERT's prior research has established that across Quebec, English speakers experience worse employment outcomes as compared to French speakers. So we know, for example, that English speakers have a higher unemployment rate. That's this middle figure here, 10.9% compared to 6.9%. We have, therefore, a larger share of the unemployed population. So the piece of the pie that English speakers make up of the unemployed population is disproportionately large compared to their total weight in the Quebec population, making up therefore 14.9% of the total population, but 22.7% of the unemployed population. And they have a slightly higher labor force participation compared to French speakers, so that's 66.6% compared to 64%. So these are statistics that we've heard at our previous research through census data, particularly from the 2021 Census of Canada. And we use this data source because it is the only source of linguistically disaggregated data available to us. So if we're interested in looking at employment outcomes, we must rely on the census data to give us the count of English as compared to French speakers in the province. But you may notice we're a good number of years out from the 2021 census. So this highlights a bit of an issue in terms of the way or the extent to which this data is up to date and reflective of the current realities of our community. And that's an issue for us to address through advocacy for better and stronger data collection for our community. But I'll also tease that internally at PERT, we're working at an additional project to do some economic modeling to get more up-to-date statistics on this front. But as it stands, currently we see that English speakers experience, as of the 2021 census, a worse employment outcomes as compared to French speakers. And, oh, perfect, okay. So what's causing these gaps? In 2022, We conducted a survey with English-speaking Quebecers as well as English language organizations and found that lack of French language proficiency was the leading barrier identified to employment that participants or respondents were identifying. Some also indicated that linguistic discrimination or employer bias towards language was also something that they'd experienced. So that could include things like accent bias, or it could also include things like perceived lack of confidence in the workplace or in one's French skills. And we also, in this, identified kind of corresponding to that issue, an interest in better French language learning solutions. And we saw similar findings among organizations that we spoke to. They mirrored that French language proficiency as a leading barrier to employment, and they also indicated that increased French language training would be of a benefit to most English speakers. So this qualitative data piece helps us to fill in or explain some of the statistics that we're seeing through census data. So the census data can tell us that something is the case, and this kind of qualitative surveying helps us to explain why. Now, that survey was conducted in 2022, prior to the creation of Proficiency Québec, which was launched in 2023. And that was a really exciting launch because it harmonized through a one-stop shop platform access to French, to full-time and part-time French classes for both immigrant and Canadian-born English speakers and French language learners. So this is really exciting to us because we've heard anecdotally that there are and there historically have been a lot of resources for French language learning among immigrant communities, which is a strong need that's certainly been expressed from a lot of those communities. And Canadian and Quebec-born English speakers were indicating that they would also benefit from similar services and maybe didn't always see themselves in the marketing for those. And so Proficiency Québec tailored and targeted their approach to include both of those kind of learner profiles. And while this is a pivotal advancement in expanding the accessibility of French language learning in Quebec, as with any new platform, there are some challenges. So these have included long wait times for courses, funding cuts for part-time learners, some class cancellations and issues particularly related to class cancellations of regional accessibility. And this highlights the need for ongoing programming that is responsive to the need of and the context of French language learners. So this is really exciting, or exciting might be too strong of a word. What is interesting about this is understanding the different profiles of learners that might need support through Francisation services and within the broader French language learning ecosystem. We, of course, know that English speakers are asking for that kind of support already. And so we wanted to deep dive into the profile of English speakers most likely to need support along the lines of French language learning. So this is a group that we are calling unilingual English speakers, or English speakers with a low level of French proficiency. So unilingual English speakers, this is if this is a bit jargony, unilingual English speakers we define for the purposes of this report would be in contrast to bilingual English speakers according to the definition of knowledge of official languages. So bilingual English speakers within the census definition of knowledge of official languages are those who are able to carry a conversation in French. And the same would be true of bilingual French speakers. Those would be defined as French speakers who are able to carry a conversation in English. Now you can see there's some wiggle room there. It's not necessarily a perfect definition capturing a specific level of competency. It can capture a pretty broad spectrum. I know a lot of people who are maybe not so confident in their French that would not indicate that they are bilingual, even though they might function bilingually, and vice versa. Sometimes you might see somebody who's extremely confident, but whose ability to communicate is a little difficult. So the definition itself is imperfect, but what we see are, broadly speaking, bilingual individuals are those who can carry a conversation in the other official language. Unilingual speakers, by contrast, would be those who can't, who have marked themselves as unable to carry a conversation in the other official language. So I'll note that this definition of unilingual excludes other languages spoken because this is only looking at official languages within the census. So somebody might be proficient in Spanish or Punjab or Farsi or any other language, but for the purposes of this survey, we're looking at it in terms of whether or not they're proficient in French, and if they're not, they're considered to have low French proficiency or to be unilingual. Let me know, please, if you have any questions on these kind of more technical statistical definitions. So I'll go into a population breakdown. What we're interested in studying here are who are Quebec's unilingual English speakers. And this is useful for us to know because it gives us a sense, if we know who these people are, if we can understand them a little bit better, then we might be able to understand their French language learning needs and the context that they're bringing to French language learning, such that we're able to offer better services and better interventions tailored to their specific realities. So we'll start with the population. Of Quebec's total population, about 5.4% are unilingual English speakers and about 9.9% are bilingual English speakers. So they make up a slice of the pie that's about 15%. And French speakers are pretty evenly split between being bilingual and unilingual in French. So if we drill down onto unilingual English speakers in particular, who are these folks? So about half identify as men, about half identify as women. This is pretty standard across English speakers and across Quebec's population as a whole. About a tenth, 11%, are youth under the age or between the ages of 15 and 24, and about a quarter are over the age of 65. About half identify as visible minorities. A small proportion are Indigenous. About half are immigrants. Over half, so about 60%, live in Montreal, although there are at least 200 unilingual speakers in every region of Quebec. And again, this mirrors kind of the general proportion of English, or the distribution of English speakers in Quebec as well. So a large share concentrated in Montreal, but among English speakers as a whole, there are about 1,000 in every region. So it makes sense that a slightly smaller share within every region would be unilingual. And of these individuals, over half have attained a post-secondary degree, so that would be cégep or higher, and approximately 80% have attained at least a secondary school degree. So how is this group of English speakers faring in the labor market? So we can look at the labor force, and as a reminder of anybody or everybody who's not a stats head the way that I am, a labor force is defined as all those who are unemployed, so searching for work, as well as those who are employed in Quebec. This wouldn't include, for example, those who are retired, those who are students full-time, things like that, who aren't kind of actively contributing to the labor market in a direct sense. So we see unilingual English speakers make up about 4.8% of the labor force, and about 11% bilingual English speakers make up about 11%. And among French speakers, about 47% or 47% of the labor force is composed of bilingual French speakers, and 37% by unilingual English French speakers. For those who are just joining, a quick note to get you up to speed. In this presentation, we're looking at the employment outcomes and experiences of unilingual English speakers. And we're defining that kind of in opposition to bilingual French speakers, as well as bilingual and unilingual French speakers. So it's a bit of a tongue twister. But bilingual English speakers in this case would be defined as those who can carry a conversation in French and who indicated being able to do so in the Census of Canada, whereas unilingual English speakers would be those who are unable to carry a conversation in French. Okay, so where are these unilingual English speakers working? Their distribution is pretty similar to where we see the majority of, or the highest proportion of the total English-speaking population, as well as the total French-speaking population working. So we have just over 10% working in manufacturing, as well as professional, scientific, and technical services, and just under 10% working in retail, healthcare, and then accommodation and food services. Now, the top 5 occupations for unilingual English speakers look a little bit different. And again, for those who are not constantly on the Statistics Canada website, the difference between industry and occupation, you can think of it in the sense of industry might be the field that you work in, and occupation is the type of work that you do and the level of education required for that role. So for example, if one was working in maybe as janitorial support staff within a hospital, their industry would be marked as within healthcare, but their occupation would go under more manual labor because it's a different type of work. Hopefully that helps to clarify. So occupations are carved up a little bit differently, and we see among unilingual English speakers, the largest share are employed in sales, services, and occupations, followed by trades, transport, and equipment operators, then business, natural and applied sciences, and occupations in education, law, and community and government services. So I'll take a moment to note that these particular occupations are often ones that English speakers may be able to engage in without a high level of French language proficiency. If that's because they're working in sales and services occupations in predominantly Anglophone spaces, or because they're able to get by with a really kind of specific French language vocabulary that they might have, but they don't necessarily consider to be a marker of bilingualism. Similarly, trades, transport, and equipment operations can be industries where English speakers don't need to have a high level of French proficiency, whereas some the next 2 occupations, business and natural sciences, might be occupations that require a higher or focus on English language skills, or proficiency if they're, for example, interacting with international or interprovincial clients or other research bodies, those kinds of things. So now I'm going to get into some comparative statistics. I have a bit of a montage of slides formatted according to this layout. So what we're going to look at is several key employment indicators or statistics comparatively across the different French language proficiencies, or the different linguistic proficiencies for French and English speakers. And the idea here is to give an idea of how unilingual English speakers are faring in comparison to other speakers, and the way that English and French proficiency in the workforce might color the navigation that people have of different workspaces. So if we start with unemployment rate, I should say, we see English speakers up here near the top left with an unemployment rate of 13.5%. That's the highest unemployment rate of the 4 considered here, while bilingual French speakers have the lowest unemployment rate of about 6.6%. And I'll note again that this data comes from the 2021 census because that's the most up-to-date linguistically disaggregated data that we have. But we know on the whole that unemployment rates are currently trending downwards, or lower than they were in the pandemic. Although we, in some of our economic modeling that we're going to preview soon, predicting that the gaps nevertheless persist. So then we can look at employment rate. So whereas unemployment rate is a proportion of all those who are unemployed as the top of the fraction compare as a percentage of all of those individuals in the labor force. Employment rate measures all of those who are employed as a percentage of the total population. So it's a little bit of a different metric. So we see that English speakers have the lowest employment rate at 49.5%. So just under half of all unilingual English speakers in the population are employed. We see a very similar rate for unilingual English speakers, about 1 percentage point higher. And then it jumps quite significantly among bilingual English speakers and bilingual French speakers. Then we can look at labor force participation rate. So labor force participation rate is looking at all of those who are employed or unemployed as a fraction of the total population. So we see that English speakers have a slightly higher labor force participation rate at 57.3%, higher than unilingual English speakers, or sorry, unilingual French speakers at 54.9%. And then once again, bilingual English and French speakers have higher labor force participation rates. So I will maybe just take a moment here to lay out or deep dive into the difference between labor and unemployment rates. So labor force participation rate is showing us all of those who are working or interested in working, looking for work in the labor force. So we see that a slightly higher proportion of unilingual English speakers as compared to unilingual French speakers are working or interested in working. But we see that a slightly lower proportion of English speakers are actually, of unilingual English speakers, are actually employed as compared to unilingual French speakers. So what this tells us is that while unilingual English speakers are heavily engaged, or slightly more heavily engaged in the labor force, they're having a slightly harder time finding employment. And this is reflected in the unemployment rate data with that higher employment rate. Okay, so then we can swap from employment statistics to income statistics and a couple other markers of socioeconomic vitality. So we see, looking at median employment income, we're focusing on employment income here just because we're concerned with the working population. We see that unilingual English speakers, again, earn the lowest median employment income of any linguistic group that we're looking at, followed by unilingual French speakers, bilingual English speakers, and then bilingual French speakers. If we look at the poverty rate, we see that unilingual English speakers have one of the highest poverty rates, the highest poverty rate of these linguistic groups, and by a quite significant amount. So whereas unilingual French speakers, bilingual English speakers, and bilingual French speakers all have rates that are about 1/3 of the rate experienced by unilingual English speakers, which shows or highlights some pretty substantive gaps. We see something moderately similar looking at low income cutoff. So this looks at all those living below a specific cutoff needed to have a certain, sorry, let me back up. Low income cutoff looks at all those who are earning an income below a specific threshold necessary as defined by Statistics Canada to have a certain quality of life according to a specific income threshold. So we'd see that over a fifth of all unilingual English speakers are living below the low income cutoff. So they're considered to have a low income, compared to 14.7% of unilingual French speakers and 10.9% of bilingual English speakers. Again, bilingual French speakers have the lowest proportion of their population living below the low income cutoff at 8.6%. So what does all of this data tell us? This presentation and our upcoming report are meant to be a quick snapshot of these comparative statistics and ones that we can return to when we have future census data that we're able to kind of compare and contrast the economic standings to. But the purpose, again, is to identify common trends or themes and issues pertaining to this particular community so we can better understand the types of interventions, particularly to support employability for this population. So what we saw overall is that English speakers with low French proficiency, or unilingual English speakers, are experiencing worse socioeconomic outcomes as compared to bilingual English speakers, unilingual, and bilingual French speakers. So of the four linguistic groups that we're looking at here, English speakers with low French proficiency are faring the worst. There is some nuance to this, as I highlighted. Unilingual English speakers have a slightly higher labor force participation rate, showing slightly higher engagement with the labor force. But because they have that lower employment rate, we see that there's maybe some issues actually going out and securing employment, as reflected by the higher unemployment rate. Across the variables measured, we also see that bilingual French speakers tend to fare the best, followed by bilingual English speakers. So this tells us once again that French language proficiency is a strong indicator of positive or stronger employment outcomes, and bilingualism can support that, the statistics show. So contributing factors. These are a few of the key themes that we identify in our report that, again, the statistics show us that something is the case, and this is our reflection on perhaps why we're seeing what we're seeing in the data. As we started off this presentation and this project with the knowledge that English speakers are identifying lack of French language proficiency as the leading barrier to employment. So it's not surprising then that when we're looking at those with the self-reported lowest levels of French proficiency, that we're seeing the worst employment outcomes. And some of the things that, and so now we'll walk through some of the themes or the contributing factors to this. So the first one I'd like to highlight is access to English language services. So we see in particular that unilingual English speakers are more likely to be unemployed, and they're also more likely to be living in poverty or below the low income cutoff. So this suggests that there is a need for essential services, to combat poverty, to reach essential or to attain essential needs for living, food, shelter, education. Um, in English, such that those are accessible to unilingual English speakers, to ensure that they're able to get the vital supports that they need in order to engage maybe downstream in other types of support. So I'll highlight here, this is maybe a bit of a theme or a trend that we see in our research more broadly, is a bit of a vicious cycle between needing employment services and French language learning for English speakers, and particularly those with lower levels of French proficiency. And this group is more likely to be living in poverty or with unemployment. And so there's a core need to find a job to earn an income in order to support oneself. But often there's a need to engage in French language learning in order to find employment, and oftentimes kind of well compensated or meaningful employment for which one is commensurate employment for which one is qualified. But in order to access that French language learning, individuals might need to divert time away from employment, and it's a bit of a cycle, which is why, of course, one of our major advocacy pieces and welcome recommendations at PERT are French language learning supports that fold into individuals' lives, or that don't force a decision between French language learning and earning an income. We also see the need for increase in tailored French language learning programming. I'll highlight here some of the other research findings that we've had from previous reports looking at access to French language learning and experiences of users of French language learning supports. Some of the key takeaways that learners will highlight is the need for resources that are tailored to their level. We're seeing a good chunk of English speakers who are in need of foundations, which are often offered maybe in a formal traditional class setting, through programs like Francisation Québec that cover those foundations and those basics. But there may be a tension between needing to be in class full time in order to access those and needing to, again, work in order to earn an income at the same time. Um, I'll also highlight here a couple of our other research reports. So we have our user journeys report. I'll put these in the chat in a moment, looking at the experiences of learners, different types of learners moving through the ecosystem of French language learning. A finding from that report was sometimes the need, particularly for those with low French proficiency, to have informational resources and promotional materials or sign up and registration information available in English, such that if learners are unable to speak French prior to engaging in the courses, they're able to access the information about those courses in English such that they can sign up. I'll also highlight, as I did at the beginning, our upcoming report on regional French language learners' needs. So the current interests in terms and needs and resources for English speakers living in the regions of Quebec. And what the kind of the breakdown of those look like and what the interests look like there. So those help to identify, again, the specific programming that different learners need. And also coming out of that report, something that I find really heartening is that English speakers are consistently reporting strong positive motivations to learn French. So English speakers are understand that French language proficiency is essential to employment in Quebec and moreover to their identity as Quebecers. And so they're naming strong desires to not only to learn French, but to better engage in Quebecois society. And so what that tells us is that we need to design programming and outreach and recruitment tools for French language learning that really captures that spirit, that speaks to and mobilizes that desire within our community. It's already there. What we need now is to draw it out and put it to action. So that is the end of my presentation. We're pretty well on schedule. It's about 12:40, so I'll perhaps close my screen. Stop sharing. There we go. If anybody has any questions, sending the PowerPoint, you're welcome to go ahead and add those to the chat now. Or I see a hand raised. I'm happy to take verbal questions as well. Adrian, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi there, Morgan. Hold on, I'll turn my camera on. It's only there. Hello. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Thank
Good.
you.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. It was super informative and really succinct in terms of your presentation of the information findings, although I'm sure it represents a great deal of work. Okay, in terms of that slide, I think it was your first slide about key takeaway.
Mhm.
I think there was something there that was quite reflective of what we understand anecdotally from the English-speaking youth community, which is that, unilingual English-speaking youth or English-speaking youth with low French proficiency, they're securing jobs. They're securing jobs, but they're more precarious. Is that what's reflected there? Like they're not, when you said, I think you made a comment about it, they're not, sorry, if you go back to your slide, the wording
Yeah, let me go ahead and
is
pull
that
that right back up.
is that the correct inference from that?
So there would be, let's see if I can start from the beginning. And then we go to Zoom and we share screen again. It could point to both. So let's see if I just click through. We're
One
interested
is your
in,
key takeaways.
please hold. Apologies for anyone getting motion sickness. There we go. This guy?
Yes. With
Yes.
low frequency, worse socioeconomic outcomes compared to bilingual English speakers doing it right.
So what I would say is that I think there's probably a two-pronged answer to your question. So we see lower employment outcomes in terms of actually securing employment, which is to say English speakers with low French proficiency have higher unemployment rate, lower employment rates, meaning actual difficulty finding jobs, or maybe longer journeys to employment. But there's
Okay.
also the case that what we don't measure here, but I think you're speaking to, would be issues of qualification or overqualification for work and finding commensurate employment. Um, so I imagine in the youth sector that that can often look like somebody graduating from CEGEP or university with a specific degree to do a specific job, and then not being able to find commensurate employment reflective of their degree, and maybe engaging in part-time work or work in hotel accommodations or in the restaurant and bar industry, or maybe in retail. Which would require maybe a different set of qualifications or like a lower educational profile. Is that correct?
That is a fact, and you've mentioned many factors in what you just said, for sure. I'm not sure that I was necessarily talking about university graduates and being overqualified for anything. I think I was talking more globally about I think the connection that I didn't quite understand, that I wanted confirmation that I understood correctly or incorrectly, was that you were saying they have higher labor force participation, but lower employment rate overall. And I thought you said that that is kind of supportive of the fact that they're in more precarious employment, meaning less secure overall. The jobs that they are getting, because they are getting them, the jobs they're getting are less secure. Was that?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Okay.
That could be true overall, but what that specific finding points to is that a
It's a
higher
mismatch.
proportion of English speakers are either working or looking for work.
Yeah.
But when you go to see who's actually employed, a lower proportion are actually employed,
Okay.
meaning that they have potentially are potentially facing more barriers to finding those jobs.
Okay.
So that would
Thank
just be about finding work, but
finding work. Yeah.
we can also talk about factors of precarious employment and precarious socioeconomic status. So things, we don't dive too deeply into it in this report, but some of our other research will talk on things like engagement in part-time versus seasonal work, engagement in industries or occupations that are maybe less well remunerated or less likely to have specific health and benefits or specific formal contracts. And we can also talk about engagement in things like entrepreneurship instead of more traditional employee-employer relations that would be markers of those more precarious situations.
Okay.
And we see those among English speakers as a whole. We haven't done a deep dive into English speakers with low French proficiency in particular.
Thank you.
A pleasure. I love stats. Macabea, yes.
I love that you love stats because you help me understand them. So thank you for that. My intervention is going to be somewhat bilingual. Dans les rapports, on parlait du cercle vicieux sur l'apprentissage du français versus le besoin de travailler. And also about the motivation and attitude. And in a research that we've done at Learn, Lesterby, and UQAM together in 2021, we've seen that it was targeting teenagers learning French and their perception of their identity and the role of French in their lives. And it was about 100% consensus about, yes, I need to learn French, but about the wanting to learn the culture and be like develop that pluricultural competency, it was a bit less than half that showed interest in that. And I think that based on, happy to see you, Adrienne, with the Youth for Youth brief, where we're talking about bilingual and bicultural English speakers and how relevant it is, I was wondering what role could be we could do in the youth sector to kind of act before they get to the workforce, and how we could have an impact in seeing how they could learn French quicker and better, and also how we could work on their perception of wanting to learn not only the language, but the culture that it's in. C'est plus comme une réflexion très large. Je suis pas sûr que le rapport va répondre à tout ça, mais c'est comment on fait pour qu'un élève qui, pour toutes sortes de raisons, n'a pas d'ouverture au niveau de l'apprentissage de cette culture-là et de la langue. La langue, tu le sais, il veut l'apprendre, mais c'est pas super enthousiasmant. Mais on sait que s'il ne l'apprend pas là, ça va être vraiment compliqué de l'apprendre dans sa vie adulte. Fait que c'était de réfléchir à ça ensemble, voir what can we do about this together.
And I'll maybe give a quick two-pronged response, and then I see Adrienne probably has her hand up for a comment, so I'll let her jump in as well. Um, so my first thought is that our survey that I'm mentioning that looks at motivations to learn French was conducted particularly with English speakers in the regions of Quebec um, across a broad range of age groups. And what was interesting within that survey, we had about over 600 respondents. I'm really pleased with that robust base. What was interesting to see in those findings was that English speakers are, I think, looking at their life as they navigate elements of daily life, going to the grocery store, going to the doctor, maybe needing to pay a parking ticket, and then starting to look at maybe that that may be more a governmental or civil society element where they would need to speak French, but also the more social aspects, where their community might be a little bit more bilingual, or they might have a francophone husband or a friend who they're not able to communicate with their spouse's family, or perhaps they have kids who are in English or French school and they're able or not to communicate with their teachers. They're seeing the implications and the driving factors to end up the positives of being better able to integrate or to engage in um, those different aspects of Quebec culture and adult life that I suspect, although I have no grounds, I suspect might come a little later than what we're seeing in the youth sector. Um, and my second intervention, to your point, is, and this is more on the speculative side, would be that classroom-based learning, while absolutely essential, both for youth, but also for particularly for learners trying to get the foundations, I think can always engender and sometimes in learners a bit of a fatigue or a desire to, this is my subject matter. I know it's, even when I know it's important, sometimes class is boring. Um, and so there's, I think, a strong need to highlight culturally immersive experiences, particularly for youth, to ingrain and embed that like love and interest and curiosity. And I think that motivation or that retrospective is there for, was reflected in our survey because we saw motivations were high among, or how should I say this? Our survey respondents were indicating that immersive experiences that they had when they were youth, when they were in school, were make or break for their French language learning. It was what gave them the skills or not to engage in maybe more casual conversation, to better create and speak French more casually or on the fly. Adrienne, you had your hand up as well. I don't know if you want to hop in.
Sure, unless there's somebody else who hasn't had a turn yet.
As of yet, I don't see any hands, so please fire away.
Hi, Malka. It's nice to see you too. I guess, okay, so we're talking about in the presentation, like your data is excellent and it's clear. To me, from where I sit at Youth for Youth, it's hard to not see it as something that could actually require people to interpret a criticism of the English school system. And because where else, we're talking about French language learning resources, the need for increased French language learning programming targeted towards English speakers, access points for English speakers to get French language training, right? Isn't that the school system? I mean, first and foremost. And when PERT talks in its studies about the ecosystem of French language learning, are we including English schools?
So because PERT looks at the adult sector, we're focused on adult learning. We haven't done, nor is it within our mandate to do assessments of the youth sector.
Okay.
But I think what's interesting is that uh, we'll hear, and I don't know if this is your experience as well, Marc Albert, that English speakers are, when reflecting on their learning experiences, are saying, even when I had really good learning experiences, what really helped me to digest and put into practice this learning opportunity was this immersive experience, whether that was extracurriculars, whether that was exposure to different friends or family who were francophone, that breakdown of le deux solitude. And so I think while it depends, there may be, I'm not familiar with the school system overly so again, maybe Mecca there would like to speak to that or not. Where there are areas to improve within the school sector, I think there's equally a desire and a need to create complementary services that help to bring the teachings from the school sector outside of the classroom, perhaps. Mecca there?
J'aimerais... Go ahead,
Sorry,
Adeline.
just my follow-up. I have to ask this so that I understand the stats. In that case, if PERT's not looking, sorry, Malcapel, just a sec, I'll be quick.
Okay.
If PERT's not looking at specifically or not teasing out English speakers who are adults, right? You're saying after the time when they would be in elementary or high school or CEGEP. If PERT's only looking at adults, are you separating, the experiences of newcomers who are French language learners, right? Because they want to integrate, and the experience of English speakers who were born here, went to school here, have de facto been immersed in the culture. Like, are we doing that with the statistics or not really? Because, and it's an important question to understand, and clarify. So, but I understand if PERT's only looking at calling French language learners those who have not been through the school system, but who are here trying to integrate. Like, that's an interesting point of distinction for me. Thanks.
My pleasure. So statistically, what we'd be interested in looking then is at controlling for different variables. We know when we control for those variables that the gaps persist. They might change a little bit, but the gaps between employment outcomes for English and French speakers when we're controlling for factors like education, immigration, etc., persist. This will be the subject of yet another upcoming PERT report on the state of employment. But it's a very valuable question to dig into, because what you're asking is, what are the actual factors that are determining these outcomes? And therefore, where do we concentrate our energies when we're looking to address these disparities? Another area that we can look at is educational trajectory. So engagement in things like in immersion programs versus in maybe core French programs versus in francophone schools. All these different trajectories. That can be a little bit harder to measure through the statistical data because we primarily rely on the census. So that would come perhaps in part through census data, but then perhaps in part through partnerships with school boards across Quebec to measure those different things. But and those would be maybe more institutional partnerships yielding those research projects. But I think what I would return to in the survey on motivations and needs in particular is we see a strong finding and a strong interest in integrate or engaging in everyday kind of culture and life in French, and gaining that exposure and the value of gaining that exposure from a young age. And that's based on self-report. So it looks a little different than kind of quantifying the specific learning, objective learning impacts that type of intervention might have. But we're hearing positive things about it. Marc Albert, I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
Il y a beaucoup de choses. Premièrement, peut-être when we're thinking about looking at like la distinction entre les personnes issues de l'immigration puis les personnes qui ont fait leur éducation en anglais, c'est deux réalités qui peuvent des fois avoir certaines langues en commun, mais qui sont vraiment distinctes, c'est clair. Il faut aussi se rappeler que si on considère également l'immigration interprovinciale, je sais qu'on ne parle pas d'immigration à proprement parler, mais il y a quand même des gens qui naissent dans d'autres provinces et qui vivent au Québec ensuite, ainsi que leurs enfants. Puis il faut aussi penser aux immigrants à court séjour qui ont accès à l'éducation en anglais, aux élèves qui ont des besoins spécifiques qui ont droit à l'éducation en anglais, puis aux élèves qui sont dits internationaux et qui arrivent habituellement quelque part. Certains arrivent à toutes sortes de moments de leur vie, mais certains arrivent habituellement au deuxième cycle secondaire et espèrent par la suite pouvoir poursuivre leurs études en anglais. Donc, ça aussi, c'est un genre de in-between category qui sont une partie de leur éducation a eu lieu en anglais. Ils sont également issus de l'immigration. Donc, il ne faut pas oublier ces gens-là qui tombent souvent entre les cracks. Ça, je pense que c'est super important. With regards to education in the youth sector, c'est sûr qu'il y a toujours un regard à faire puis un auto-examen, je veux dire, à faire. I was once a French as a second language teacher in a high school. Et puis, je trouve sincèrement qu'il y a énormément de pression qui est mise sur nos épaules because we are fully aware of our role in the English-speaking vitality. Et donc, souvent, quand on commence à enseigner le français, on pense comme, cool, je vais partager ma langue avec d'autres personnes. And then we realize, oh, if they're not bilingual, ça va être vraiment dur leur vie. Fait que là, c'est plus juste de passer le programme, c'est tout ce poids-là qui est sur nos épaules. And I'll be real, it's super heavy. Parce qu'on est très conscient des enjeux. Puis on essaie d'être comme de bonne humeur, puis d'amener de la culture, puis des chansons, puis la. Mais ce qu'on observe, puis ça, Morgan, tu l'as nommé, c'est que est-ce qu'il y a un examen de conscience que les profs de français langue seconde doivent avoir puis que le milieu anglophone? Toujours. That's growth. Et puis c'est important de célébrer ce qu'on fait de bien puis d'améliorer ce qu'on fait de moins bien. Mais je pense qu'une chose qui est vraiment fondamentale, c'est vraiment l'immersion communautaire ou dans les cours de danse, les cours de soccer, les camps de jour. C'est pour ça qu'on a créé Accent Québec en 2018 et puis qu'on veut vraiment travailler avec des partenaires pour le maintenir. Another thing that we've developed is some kind of a quick FSL workshop for anyone who's doing anything with anyone. And fun fact, we're looking for financing for that. Mais l'idée, c'est que ce qu'on observe à l'extérieur du milieu scolaire, c'est que, à quelques exceptions près, il y a des institutions qui ont ces services-là, mais de manière générale, c'est soit tu vas vivre ton expérience en français, soit tu vas vivre ton expérience en anglais, mais l'idée d'accueillir quelqu'un qui est en train d'apprendre le français ou l'anglais en langue seconde ou additionnelle, les gens sont de manière générale pas outillés pour ça. Donc, une équipe de Learn, de l'Ester B. Pearson School Board, du commissariat langues officielles, de Canadian Parents for French, de John Abbott College, on a vraiment uni nos forces autour des années 2020. And like, well, it was 2020, so we had stumbling blocks. Mais l'idée, c'est qu'on cherche, la formation existe. On cherche à la rendre disponible à la communauté pour que n'importe qui, n'importe où dans le Québec qui a un musée, un camp de vacances, un club de karaté, what have you, puisse avoir un genre de crash course pour être capable d'accueillir l'élève qui est en train d'apprendre une langue. Fait que ça, moi, c'est quelque chose que je me dis, on pourrait regarder ça ensemble, puis voir comment on peut rendre la chose disponible. Et ça faciliterait, à mon avis, euh, l'inclusion culturelle, puis ça créerait des ponts entre les communautés linguistiques, parce que les deux solitudes, they're tough. C'est dur de briser ces murs-là. But I think that with determination that we share, let's do it. Donc, voilà. That was, I don't know, was it a question, an answer, an editorial, somewhere in between?
Les deux, ça marche. Thank you. I'm seeing a couple comments just saying thank you for the interventions, everybody. Um, I think I will go ahead and close our conversation there because it is 1 p.m. But thank you all for thank you for the questions and comments. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for attending. Our report will be published in the next few months, so we're very excited to share that with you all. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody. Bye bye.